Well, we were talking about the big bands, and did you know about the music strike when it occurred?
No, I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I never, if I did, it didn't register very well. I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I should have realized there were more people singing without a musical background, but
Mm-hmm.
it never dawned on me.
Because you don't really know that transition when that suddenly, when that kind of took over.
No, I sure don't. I just, things you don't pay attention. The war was going on. You were more concerned about your safety or yourself than the service and the people being killed overseas.
Yeah.
Because we had some huge casualties. There was thousands of people died every day. It seemed like,
Yeah.
especially in D-Day and the invasion.
Yeah. Where were you stationed during that time?
Basic training. I was in Fort Monmouth in New Jersey
Yeah.
at D-Day.
Now, when that, do you remember when that happened? When you got the news?
Yes, very distinctly. Yes, we were well aware of D-Day and the invasion of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I think the invasion of North Africa we didn't pay that much attention to, but boy, the big invasion of Europe was big news.
Mm-hmm. Now, when that took place, was it we weren't actually a participant at that time, and it,
What do you mean?
as far as one of the major components when as far as in Europe as we were with the fall of Japan. Do you think that was kind of we were kind of on the same level, or we were in charge at that time, or kind of controlling a lot of the action at that time, like we were as far as for having our introduction with Japan?
Well, it was both full scale, and those of us when we came back from Europe after defeating the VE Day, we were concerned about our next trip was going to Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and how terrible a struggle that would be because we knew they would be fighting every foot of the land there.
Yes.
Because I know I've talked to people who were actually stationed there, and they were quite concerned because it was going to be bloody going into Japan.
Yes.
They would be defending their homeland.
Yes.
But, I went back to Okinawa 20 years after they was taken over by Americans. And 20 years later, it was such a vicious battle going on in Okinawa. They had just found the dog tags for General Buckner, who was the commanding general there.
Mm-hmm.
So it took 20 years to discover his dog tags after the war ended.
Wow.
And I had to go up north, and they sent an armed guard with me to go up north because there were still Japanese holed up in the northern part of Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
So it was rough times over there,
Mm-hmm.
even 20 years later.
Oh. Oh.
And,
But even after the war there, it wasn't as much of a celebratory time as it was in Europe because there was still a lot of resistance
yeah.
from the people there. It wasn't a sense of freedom or a sense of this regime had been destroyed.
Well, they honored their emperor, and he certainly was honored and was given a role in the settlement and so on. So it was a good transition, I thought, over in Japan, having lived there about must have been about 9 years later I went after the war ended in Japan. I lived over there.
Mm-hmm.
And the people were very friendly towards Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a different climate than you found in Europe.
Mm-hmm. What was it like in Europe?
Destroyed. It was utterly destroyed. Germany was nothing but rubble. I went back about 20 years after that war in Europe and couldn't believe the reconstruction. But I remember this one town, Friedrichshafen, it was called. The mayor of the town was very reluctant to have Americans. He didn't want to surrender the town. So I think he shot the captain of this infantry group. And the Americans leveled that town except for a church. One church stood after that. And I still see it in my mind. I still see the picture of that town after it was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
It was rubble. But he should have shot the captain, of course, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Friedrichshafen, never forget it.
Oh. that was a space you were happy to leave and get away from.
Yeah, but you always were concerned, you know. There was no sharpshooters after the war ended, it was dead. But I can still picture, you know, the bodies of the Germans after an attack or something. You would scurry up there and we see these bodies hanging over the vehicles and so on. They hadn't been collected yet or picked up by the natives.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who took care of them. I assume it was the native Germans that buried them or something. But I can still see getting ahead of the troops or getting ahead and getting too far in advance and seeing these bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And war is ugly.
Yes.
War is ugly.
Yes.
But
Any comparisons between that time period and this time period?
these are different wars we fight now. Those were wars to destroy and defeat. I don't know what kind of wars we're fighting. I remember, not that we took the town itself, I remember going into a town after it had been captured, and every single person in town had to give up their rifle, their weapons, their guns, had to give up their radios. They all brought it to the square in the city or give it to the mayor's office or something. Every single gun was confiscated. There was no weapons around. There was no concern that people would be shooting you because they were defeated good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why they didn't do more than they did in Iraq, but they sure left a lot of ammo around for people to keep shooting at people.
Yes.
It's a different war. Different war.
Yeah. Not the same tactics towards victory here, and you're leaving material like that behind to come back and bite you.
Sure can. It's not a complete defeat, no. There was no question about it. Germany was defeated. So was Japan. Japan was defeated. And there was no leeway for them.
Mm-hmm. And you think because of that, that made the transition much easier towards peace after that?
Well, they were defeated and that was it. And there was no, they had a speedy trial. You know, that wars trial went on at Nuremberg. I think the same thing happened in Japan. The people that misbehaved or tortured our people too much were just destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I worked with a lady in Paris for a few weeks, Mrs. Hastings. I'll never forget that woman, English lady. She was an air raid warden during the Blitz of London, and she was hard as nails. And she was working her way to Berlin, and if she could have got her hands on Hitler, she would have done it herself, because she had seen so much tragedy in England.
Mm-hmm.
And Mrs. Hastings was one of a kind, tough as nails.
Hmm.
But, yeah, anyway. It's a different war, I guess.
Yeah. No end in sight, unfortunately.
You know? And we took our lumps too.
But that was one of the interesting things for me as far as with the V-Dish records, because it seemed so much more of a unified support that was from home.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel that you were backed by the American
Oh,
people during that time?
Oh, yeah, it was a good feeling.
Yeah.
You know, it was, you know, things were being rationed. People back in this country were rationing gas and food and everything else. So it was a tough pinch for everybody. Everybody knew that this was a struggle for survival.
Mm-hmm.
And it was beginning to hurt. You know, people were kind of wonder if we're going to win this war. Because things weren't going well, especially out in the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
And the Japanese had taken over quite a bit over there.
When did that transition come for you when you went from Europe over to Okinawa?
Well, it was 20 years later or so, and I was a civilian by then and working just on an assignment.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw things differently, of course, having grown up a lot since, because I was in my early 20s when I was in the service. And, I'm surprised about these V-discs because I never knew about them, and course, we didn't have portable radios in those days, and I don't know how people might have heard this on the radio, how they carried radios with them.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been a company effort to have a radio so the troops could hear it or something like that. I'm very curious how it was disseminated, you know. It might have been that people in their homes heard it, you know, the people that were in France or England and so on, rather than maybe the troops.
Mm-hmm.
But just a thought.
On a lot of these, when they were transferred over, they had portable turntables, and these were wind-up units. So you could put these on and then play these 78s. In fact, part of the kit that came with them were replacement needles for the record players that you could play these on.
So they probably played them in the barracks, mess halls, places like that?
Exactly, and on the ships,
Oh.
they had attachments, audio attachments, that they could plug it in to the overall speaker
Oh,
system on the
speaker cell.
ships,
Okay,
and they could play them that way.
okay.
A friend of mine who I had interviewed, his name is Fred Sage. He used to command a troop carrier, and they had a plug-in system so they could plug these turntables into their overall speaker system
Oh,
and
okay.
play them through their ships.
Probably heard it and never thought of it on a troop ship, of course. We had a 12-day trip to France when we went over. And the first 4 days I was out of it because I was seasick. Good grief. Never been so sick in my life. But I probably could have cared less those first 4 days.
Well, what kind of ship was it, do you know?
We called a Sea Tiger, and it was a troop carrier. Bunks were 7 high and where I was at. And it was a nasty crossing. It was in February, so it was real rough. And my sea legs just wasn't up to it. And,
What port did you leave from initially?
Fort Hamilton, I think, around New York City somewhere.
And then your destination was?
Le Havre, France.
Hmm.
Le Havre, so they...
And this was during the rough season?
Yeah, very
On the-
rough. And then coming back, it only took us 4 days to get back, and it was perfectly smooth. Came back in July, so it was very smooth. We slept out on deck. It was a fun cruise coming back, but going over, man.
12 days across.
12 days. We were in and out of the place all over. They were zigzagging too. Not that anyone, we never were attacked or anything, but the submarines, still lurking around.
No, but that wasn't crossing your mind when you were seasick.
Sink this ship. Let's get out of this misery.
Let's be done with
An awful feeling. I'm not good on sea, I guess, but after that was great. 4 days. All I hear was that anchor hitting against the side of the ship, going up and down.
Oh, wow.